black girl dares to pull out a phone while standing at a checkpoint. The police chief drew his gun. He yelled, he fired. He didn't bother checking what the girl was holding. Her skin color was reason enough for him to pull the trigger. But what he didn't expect was this. The silent man, standing in the heart of the nightmare, was once the commander of a unit that specialized in erasing traces in the Middle East. A man so dangerous that the government itself dared not give him orders. And now, justice no longer lies in the hands of the court, it lies in the silence of a father. What state do you live in? Whose side are you on? The siren wasn't loud. It cut through traffic like a thin wire, not a warning but a selection. A black SUV, family grade, mid-range, nothing unusual, slowed down under the sharp instruction of a cruiser pulling up beside it. They weren't speeding, they hadn't run a light, but the officer waved them over anyway. 2 fingers extended, the other hand resting loosely over his holster. The vehicle complied, the driver's window lowered. The man inside, late 40s, dressed in plain gray, nodded once. No argument, no question. The silence was too calm, the kind that made officers uncomfortable. The cruiser door opened. Boots hit asphalt. A second patrol car edged behind, closing off the rear. No sirens now. Just the pop of a radio clicking off. 2 officers approached, hands floating near their hips, as if the air itself might justify a weapon. "License and registration," one of them said. "No, sir." No reason offered. The man reached slowly into the glove box, eyes forward. No tremor in his movement. His wife, in the passenger seat, looked straight ahead. Lips pressed into a line. In the back, a girl, maybe 13, held a phone in both hands. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. Frozen mid-sext, she looked up once. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was moving fast. It felt like a mistake, a misunderstanding they'd walk away from. "Step out of the vehicle," came the second order, not directed at the man, not at the wife. The girl blinked, looked at her mom. No response. "You, out. Now." She pushed the door open. Her sneakers touched the pavement. She still held the phone, not filming, just holding. A case with cartoon animals dangled from her wrist, a frayed strap hanging loose. 1 step, 2. The officer tensed. His voice clipped the air like a whip. "Drop it! Drop it now!" She flinched, started to raise her hands. The phone was still there, glinting under the afternoon sun. It caught a reflection, metal or glass, hard to tell. The officer moved before she did. His fingers squeezed. 1 crack, 1 shot. It didn't echo. It collapsed. Her legs snapped sideways, folding under her like a dropped marionette. She went down hard, her hand smacking the asphalt, phone clattering beside her, screen spiderwebbed instantly. Her mouth opened, but the scream caught inside. She looked confused, more than pained, as if her body hadn't decided yet whether this was real. Blood spilled fast. It wasn't a graze. It poured down her calf, over the white sneaker, soaking the sock, mixing with the dust and oil of the roadside. Her pink Cheers skirt, sequined trim, school logo on the hem, bloomed with red like a flower dying in reverse. The phone blinked once and went dark. "Weapon!" the officer shouted, but no one echoed him. The second officer didn't move. He looked at the girl, then at his partner. His mouth twitched, not in fear, but in disbelief. No one else spoke. The mother's door creaked open. She stepped out slowly, as if every second might reset the scene. She didn't scream either. She knelt beside the girl, hands shaking, but no sound came. The man, the father, still in his seat, exhaled once, then stood. He moved with exactness, not slow, not fast, no wasted motion. The kind of pace that suggested practice, or something older. The 2 officers looked at him now. One of them took a step back. Instinct, the wrong kind. He walked around the vehicle, not hurrying, until he stood 5 feet from his daughter. She lay curled, fingers twitching near the shattered phone. Her mouth moved. No sound. Her breath stuttered in short gasps. Blood made a thick halo beneath her thigh. The sequins on her skirt caught the light, scattered it in chaotic angles. Nothing was symmetrical. The man didn't kneel. He didn't cry. He didn't ask why. He looked at the officer. Not the one who fired, but the other, the one whose hand hadn't twitched. Their eyes locked for half a second. The silence was brutal, not charged, not threatening, just full. The shooter's hand trembled slightly now. Sweat gathered along his temple. His weapon was still raised unnecessarily, pointed at the ground. No one asked him to lower it. No one told him he was wrong. No one did anything at all. The father shifted his weight, barely, almost imperceptible. His arms stayed at his sides. The blood reached the tip of his daughter's fingers. She tried to move them. They smeared a thin line across the concrete. Her face was pale, lips bluish. Shock had settled in. Her eyes rolled back for a second, then focused again. She whispered something. No one heard it. The officer who fired took a step toward her, perhaps out of reflex. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. The movement stopped. Everyone froze. The camera on the cruiser had blinked red once, recording, but now it didn't. A quiet, static sound hummed from one of the radios. The mother pressed her palms against her daughter's leg, trying to stop the blood. She looked up at the man, her husband, as if waiting for permission. He didn't nod, didn't speak, but he moved closer. One footstep, that was all. The shooter flinched. The girl's breath rasped, and the phone, cracked, ruined, vibrated once. A notification that would never be read. The man finally knelt, one knee on the ground, close to the blood but not touching it. His daughter looked at him. Her mouth formed the start of a name. It never finished. His eyes didn't soften. Not rage, not grief, just cold calculation, the kind that weighed options, measured outcomes. He extended a hand, touched the edge of the phone with 2 fingers, then looked up, not at the shooter, but at the second officer, the one who still hadn't drawn his gun. Their eyes met again, this time longer. A silent exchange. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not even judgment, recognition. The shooter backed up a full step now. The mother's hands were soaked. She muttered prayers without realizing it. The words fell apart as fast as she said them. A siren wailed in the distance far too late. Traffic had backed up. Bystanders were filming now, held behind a barrier of cruisers and yellow tape that hadn't been put up yet. None of them knew what had happened. Not really. They would see a girl in a pink cheerleader outfit on the pavement, bleeding through the pattern of hearts and stars stitched onto her sock. They would see a father kneeling beside her, unmoving. They would see officers nearby, none offering help. They would assume anger or pain. They wouldn't see the distance between the man's fingers and the shattered screen, the exact half-inch. They wouldn't notice the way he had positioned himself between her and the sun, casting shade on her face. They wouldn't hear the silence. Not the absence of noise, but deliberate quiet, chosen, controlled. They wouldn't feel the air shift, but the shooter felt it, and he took another step back. He didn't speak, he didn't shout, he didn't weep. He knelt beside the girl, his daughter, bleeding through the fabric of a skirt too bright for the day to carry anymore, and in that stillness, the entire street seemed to hold its breath. The scene had stopped moving. Only the light shifted now, crawling slowly across the blood-darkened pavement, drawing a cruel halo around her trembling leg. He was still, not with the fragility of grief, but with the control of a man who knew exactly what he was choosing not to do. The officers didn't dare touch him. One of them tried, a young man with too much badge and too little experience, approaching with caution laced in ignorance, his hand reaching out as if proximity could solve the tension. The moment the officer touched his shoulder, it changed. The grip came out of nowhere, no build-up, no warning. His wrist caught in the older man's hand like a trap snapping shut without sound. The movement wasn't violent, but it was final. The officer's knees buckled slightly from the pressure, not from pain, but from the unmistakable knowledge that he'd made a mistake. The older man didn't glare. He didn't rise. He simply looked ahead, as if holding the pulse of the entire situation between his fingers. Then he released him, as if letting go of an object no longer of use. The officer stepped back with the look of someone who had touched a wire and realized too late it was live. The father leaned slightly closer to the girl. His face didn't change. He didn't call her name. Instead, he whispered something low, coded, precise. Words not meant for civilian ears. 3 syllables, each crisp as a command. Echo. Point, red. There was no panic, no softness. These weren't words for comfort. They were keys turning in locks built long before this day. The girl moved, barely. Her fingers flinched against the pavement, brushing broken glass and the edge of her phone, and her lips echoed something too quiet to hear. He nodded once, the smallest movement, as if confirming her receipt of a transmission rather than her pain. Then came the signal. He reached beneath his belt line, under fabric deliberately dull and forgettable, and his thumb found a pressure pad disguised as ordinary stitching. A half-circle motion, then 2 taps. Silent, precise, unmistakable. Somewhere far from this curb, far from the blood and sirens and smartphones raised by trembling bystanders, a signal activated. Red level. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't revenge. It was execution-level authorization, embedded in a system the public didn't know existed. It was a code meant to summon not soldiers, but shadows. People who'd erased their names long ago, who lived off-grid by choice, who didn't ask why, only when. The officers didn't see the gesture. They saw a father kneeling beside his wounded child, and they assumed grief. They assumed shock. They assumed wrong. One tried again, older this time, more measured, stepping forward with a voice that almost passed for human concern. "Medics are close," he said, but the words didn't land. The father didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the girl, his fingers resting near the broken phone like a marker drawn in ritual. Another officer, the one who had fired, remained frozen, eyes darting between the man and the blood and the pistol still hanging heavy on his hip. He had spoken once. Weapon, but no one echoed it. Now, he didn't speak at all. The sirens grew louder in the distance, but they were too late. Too performative. The moment that mattered had already occurred. A child had been shot on a street with nothing in her hands but a phone shaped like a rabbit. A father had knelt and chosen not to scream, and somewhere, under the radar of law and procedure, wheels had begun to turn. When the ambulance finally arrived, the medics rushed without eye contact, their focus surgical, mechanical, trained to ignore the reasons and repair the damage. The father stepped back just enough to allow them through, but not enough to cede ground. One of them tried to move the phone, shattered and still warm. "No," the man said, and the medic froze. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a protest. It was the kind of word that didn't invite discussion. He picked up the phone himself, tucked it into a pocket with the ease of someone salvaging evidence, not memories. As they lifted the girl onto a stretcher, she whimpered once, not from pain, but from dislocation, from the shock of being taken from the only stable thing left, him. Her eyes found his, and he gave nothing back but presence. She didn't cry. Neither did he. There was no room for that now. Her blood had already said enough. The paramedics closed the doors. The siren activated as the ambulance began to pull away, cutting through the noise that had started to build behind the police line. Voices, outrage, smartphones recording, questions flying into the thick air. None of it reached him. He remained in place for 1 second longer, eyes on the road, then turned and walked, not rushed, not slow, but paced like a metronome, back toward the driver's side of the vehicle that was still waiting, still idling like the moment had never happened. The officers parted around him like water breaking over stone. None dared touch him. Even the one who had tried earlier stood frozen, as if a hand had closed around his lungs instead of his wrist. One of them muttered, "We need to take a statement," but the words dropped like lead into silence. No one followed. He opened the door, slid into the seat, and placed both hands on the wheel without starting the engine. For a moment he sat there, eyes ahead, not moving, not blinking. Then his hand reached once more beneath the dash, where a second device, smaller and older, sat embedded, a press, a hold, a transmission. The system he'd just awakened had no badge, no chain of command, no approval flowchart. It wasn't governed by politics or paperwork. It was old, patient, and waiting. And now it was listening. He did not speak again. He did not need to. The silence had already done the work. The silence had already done the work. And now the silence began to echo, not through grief or panic, but through machines, systems, men. By the time the ambulance crossed into the outer ring of the medical zone, a digital request pinged inside the city police database. ID verification needed for next-of-kin notification, standard, routine. The system ran the plate, cross-checked facial data from the scene, and sent the request upstream. A minor process, meant to confirm name, age, and address, but instead of returning a file, the screen blinked once, then froze. Access denied. A blank gray panel where data should be. Not classified, not restricted, just absent, like the man didn't exist. At first, the tech assumed a glitch. He refreshed the system, ran a secondary scan through DMV, then another through the Federal Registry. Nothing. Not a mismatch, not a redacted field, just absence. The field labeled subject identity came back null, while every other name involved in the incident processed normally. Even the wounded girl's records pulled instantly. School, medical, social, but the man, nothing, like a silhouette cut from the page. He turned to his supervisor, a woman who'd seen everything from narcotics raids to city council bribery rings, and handed her the screen. She stared, then typed in her override credentials. The result didn't change. She said nothing, only picked up the phone and called the precinct's internal intel liaison. Not protocol. By the time the precinct captain was informed, the silence around the man had grown louder than any gunshot. 3 terminals failed to recognize him. Facial recognition software sent back not no match, but restricted vector. Internal Affairs flagged the data pathway, assuming the man was tied to a buried witness protection case or sealed counterintelligence file. The IT department attempted a higher clearance run through a federal mirror server, only to receive a warning: access violation. Terminal locked, audit in progress. Then came the real shift. A sergeant, a veteran with 22 years in service, sleeves rolled to the elbow, cynicism baked into his jawline, was staring at the grainy footage of the shooting, watching the man's movements frame by frame. He didn't look at the girl. He didn't flinch at the gunfire. He simply watched the man's posture, his stillness, the precision in the way he took control without lifting a finger. Something crawled under the sergeant's skin. Not fear, but memory. It struck like dust from a room you thought you'd sealed for good. He turned to the screen again, narrowed his eyes, and remembered. Not a name, not a rank, but a feeling. In 2009, during a shared operation overseas, location scrubbed, unit name coded, he'd been stationed as part of an intel relay team embedded with U.S. Special Tactics support. It was meant to be simple: drone surveillance, logistical confirmation. Nothing field active. Then came the blackout. Then came the whisper. Ghost team. No insignia, no comms trail. Just a half-dozen men who arrived in the night, eliminated 3 cells in 2 days, and vanished before sunup. The mission was officially denied afterward, personnel reports purged, but one man stuck in his mind. Not for violence, but for quiet. A leader who didn't bark orders, who moved without needing permission, who left no trace. The sergeant looked back at the paused image, the man kneeling beside the girl, and the unease inside him became shape. He stepped away from the desk, didn't speak, just wrote one sentence on a piece of paper. This isn't the first time I've seen him. He folded it twice and handed it to the captain. Then he left the room without waiting for a response. In the chaos of policy meetings, press statements, damage control, and officer debriefings, a single sheet of paper arrived at the medical center's security checkpoint. No official letterhead, no signature, just 7 typed words in the center of the page. Do not remove him from the premises. The guard reading it frowned, tried to radio the origin. The line was dead. He looked up, saw the man still sitting in the corner of the ICU hallway, unmoving, and folded the paper into his pocket without another word. Inside the ICU, beyond the glass, the girl slept under the haze of medication and pulse monitors, her leg wrapped, her vitals steady. Her phone had been placed beside her, not by staff, but by her father, who had entered her room only once and had said nothing. The nurses had watched him from the doorway. He hadn't touched her face, hadn't spoken. He'd placed the phone where she could see it when she woke up, then turned and left without breaking stride. One nurse tried to ask his name. He responded only with a note left at the reception desk. The handwriting was surgical, emotionless. "I'm not leaving the hospital. My name is not important." That was all. The note was scanned, copied, and added to a mounting folder marked Urgent, Unidentified Male/Incident 47471. When a junior administrator attempted to input the line into the patient record, the system flagged the phrase, "My name is not important," as an invalid data field. The computer demanded correction, but none came. Across the city, 3 different departments now had open files on the man. No one dared make a move. Someone in cybercrime tried to run a backdoor metadata extraction based on the surveillance stills. He made it 60 seconds in before his terminal went dark. 3 minutes later, he received a call from an untraceable line. A voice, male, distorted, said simply, "Close the file." "For your record." The tech complied without protest. In the police HQ, a deputy commissioner was pacing in his office, irritation buzzing through his skin like static. He barked at his assistant, "Run a full background. I don't care how deep you have to go. Nobody ghosts a public shooting. Nobody." But when she returned 5 minutes later, her face was white. She said nothing, just held up her tablet. The commissioner stared at the screen. A single line of text blinked against black. "File protected under exemption Omega-7. Then a prompt. "Violation attempted. Logged." He threw the tablet across the room. In the parking structure of the hospital, a black sedan sat idling. Unmarked, but watched. Inside, a man in a suit with no badge stared out through tinted glass, jaw locked. He didn't get out. He didn't speak into his radio. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the front doors as if waiting for something to collapse. It didn't. Inside, the man sat still, hands on his knees, face unreadable. Nurses passed. Doctors moved. Security cameras blinked red, then off. He did nothing, said nothing. But the message had already spread, in precincts, in hallways, in whispers. Not a man, not a father, not even a suspect. A presence, a name buried so deep the attempt to speak it risked summoning something bigger than law. They didn't need to speak. They never had. When the signal pulsed across, encrypted frequencies long since considered dormant, an alert most had assumed permanently buried under diplomatic scars and unacknowledged wars, there was no alarm, no panic, no calls exchanged in the dead of night. Only movement, quiet, precise, absolute. The kind of movement that only men built in shadows would recognize. Somewhere in Nevada, in a house too clean for its occupant, a man sat in his garage sharpening a blade not used in 13 years. The grindstone spun in slow, controlled cycles. His phone buzzed once. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. He reached into a cabinet lined with ordinary tools and removed a cloth-wrapped cylinder, unrolling it on the workbench to reveal a map, hand-drawn, edges browned, dotted with red slashes like phantom wounds across forgotten coordinates. He didn't study it. He simply touched one symbol at the bottom corner, an inverted triangle pierced with a double bar, the red level sigil, etched in code only 6 men alive could read. In a fishing village off the Baltic coast, another man stood waist-deep in water, reeling in a net heavy with silence. The breeze was light. The docks were empty. His hand grazed the pocket of his overalls where a rusted pendant sat, a gear-shaped medallion with a hollow center, worn smooth by salt and time. When the signal reached him, it arrived through the flicker of a solar panel monitor blinking in his cabin window. 3 flashes. Pause. 3 again. He turned without urgency, stepped onto the dock, and walked barefoot to the old hatch behind his shed. Beneath it, a sealed crate waited, untouched since the day he'd promised never to open it again. Inside, a scope wrapped in oiled canvas, an MRE pack, 3 years expired, and a child's drawing, folded into a photo of 2 men standing in front of a burning embassy. He took the scope, and nothing else. In the Colorado Highlands, altitude muffled the world, but not him. He had never stopped training. His cabin was more fortress than shelter, and his daily routine included 10-mile runs with weighted vests and target practice into pine trees that never told secrets. The red level signal didn't come through a device. It came by mail. A single envelope slid into his locked box, postmarked from nowhere, containing only a metal sliver, a fragment of a military dog tag with one half-letter visible, R. That was all he needed. He walked to the base of the fireplace, removed a loose stone, and lifted a small duffel packed 10 years ago to the hour. When he unzipped it, the first thing he did was check the weight of the sidearm, still balanced, still ready, and in a rural corner of the Philippines, a man known to locals only as Uncle wiped sweat from his brow after helping rebuild a school roof with palm leaves and stubborn nails. His hands were calloused with a different kind of work now, but when the red level signal came, embedded within an outdated shortwave broadcast buried under gospel music and static, he froze mid-mation. A voice, distorted, coded, spoke just 6 digits and a word. Reversal approved. He didn't finish the roof. He walked inside the hut, peeled back a wall panel, and retrieved a case lined in velvet. Inside was a watch, still ticking. He strapped it to his wrist, then opened a drawer beneath the floorboards and removed a set of photographs. The top image showed a girl smiling in a pink cheer uniform, with a birthday cake behind her. The man blinked once, then turned the photo over. On the back, in neat print, a name, Ava. They had all received it, and they had all responded. One asked why. None needed an update. The red level signal wasn't an alert to assess. It was a promise made long ago. If the system ever came for one of them, the rest would come not to mourn, but to finish the unfinished. The sigil, the inverted triangle, had only ever been used once before, during a mission scrubbed from public record after it erased an entire rogue faction in 72 hours. No civilians harmed, no bodies found, no evidence left behind, just results. Each man acted differently. One cleaned a rifle by candlelight. One sewed the red symbol into the lining of his glove. One etched the date of the girl's shooting into the back of a pocket knife, blade worn thin from years of waiting, and one, who hadn't fired a bullet since the fall of Kandahar, unwrapped a folded note that simply read, "Silence isn't surrender, it's strategy." In the silence of their separate worlds, they were already converging. The distances between them didn't matter. Flights, borders, and time zones, none were obstacles. They had rehearsed this in theory, never believing they'd need to. Now the pieces moved like chess without a board or a clock. No communication, no confirmation, only convergence. And yet there was one shared ritual. One moment, each of them paused for the red mark. They each had it differently. For one, it was burned into the butt of a shotgun. For another, carved beneath a ring only removed for sleep. For a third, it was coded into a flash drive, never once plugged into a machine. For the last, it was painted in blood-red nail polish onto a plastic toy truck, left untouched on a shelf since his son's funeral. The mark wasn't about glory. It wasn't about identity. It was a trigger, a symbol of consensus that when one of them was hunted, none of them waited for permission to respond. Somewhere inside a government building labeled as a storage site, a quiet ping alerted an AI-driven surveillance cluster to pattern anomalies. 4 dormant biometric profiles reactivated within 3 minutes of each other. A low-level analyst flagged the report for review, tagging it, "Coincidental anomaly, no threat detected." His supervisor didn't read past the first line before approving dismissal. And yet, thousands of miles away, 4 men packed, planned, and vanished, not into thin air, but into strategy, into a plan written before modern databases learned their names. Their identities had been wiped long ago, not for protection, but for freedom. This was not revenge, it was a return. They never spoke of him after the operation, not in official reports, not in barroom stories. His name was mentioned once, then erased, not by force, but by fear. The kind of fear that doesn't bark or snarl but whispers behind closed doors and stains the back of your tongue long after the smoke clears. And now, years later, staring at a grainy, still image of a man kneeling beside a blood-soaked child, that same fear bloomed cold in the gut of a mid-ranking officer named Riker, whose hands had once been crushed under rubble and pulled free by fingers stronger than they should have been. He knew it the moment he saw the angle of the shoulder, the curve of the jaw, the way the man never once looked at the shooter. It wasn't just recognition, it was memory detonating. But this time it wasn't in a war zone, it was downtown, in daylight, and it was happening again. He shut his office door before the panic took shape, locked it, killed the lights, then opened the drawer he hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside was a folder, half-torn, water-damaged, edges scorched. Classified once, maybe twice. He'd stolen it during a relocation purge, never intending to look at it again, until now. His fingers trembled only once as he opened it. Inside, a photograph, old and grainy. 2 soldiers standing outside the collapsed entrance of a school-turned-bunker, one of them holding a baby wrapped in a dirt-smeared thermal blanket. The baby had wide eyes and a soft red mark on her cheek, no more than weeks old. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, "Ava, you owe her this." He turned the page. There was a field debrief, redacted almost to nonsense. But he remembered. Not the details, the moment. He was bleeding out, too weak to scream, his comms jammed, legs crushed under a wall section. They had written him off. Everyone except one man. A man who walked into that collapsing hell not because of orders, but because silence had become unbearable. He'd pulled Riker out without a word. No threat, no drama, just eyes that said, "You'll breathe, or I'll stop breathing first." Now that same man was here, in this city, in this moment. And the girl who had bled on the pavement, she was the child from that photo. Riker stumbled back from his desk, pulse hammering like it had in the sandstorm all those years ago, not because of fear, but because this wasn't random. This wasn't tragic, it was systemic, and he was inside the blast radius. Someone knocked on his door. He didn't answer. Another knock, more urgent. "Captain, there's a press request about the shooting. They want a timeline." He didn't respond. He was staring at the photo again. Ava, that tiny, smudged face, that name. He had watched the footage 5 times, each time the same stillness, the same precision. That wasn't grief, that wasn't a loss. That was restraint, and beneath it, something older. He opened the internal database and pulled up every file related to the incident. Most of it was already sealed. Some of it is marked for deletion. And yet, somehow, even now, there were red flags. Quiet orders from higher up. Pressure to settle, to smooth, to make it go away. But Riker couldn't look away. He clicked open the medical intake from the hospital. There it was again. Next of kin, name withheld, subject declined to confirm identity. He scrolled faster, found the hospital's security note. Do not remove him from premises. No author, no department, just a fact. His throat dried. He minimized the window, reopened the photo, then slammed his fist against the desk hard enough to crack the screen. The assistant knocked again, more hesitantly this time. "Sir, they're saying this could get political," Riker muttered. "It already is." He opened the encrypted comms channel, typed in a search string he had no clearance for. He used an old passkey from the agency that no longer technically existed. The interface blinked once, then loaded a message queue. Buried deep in a system tagged Omega-9, a file opened with the words, "Reversal Protocol, active, 4 assets in motion, primary contact unknown. No command override available." His stomach dropped. This wasn't a revenge op. It wasn't a lone wolf snapping under pressure. It was a reactivation, and he was standing in the middle of it with a badge made of paper and a conscience made of glass. A voice behind him, "You look pale." He spun. It was Colonel Grayson. Retired, officially, but still lurking in the corridors of federal security like a bad smell in an old suit. Grayson stepped into the office uninvited, closing the door behind him. His voice oozed with the kind of contempt that comes from always knowing more than you're allowed to say. "Let me guess. You saw the footage and wet yourself." Riker didn't rise, didn't speak. Grayson smirked. "He's back, and you, poor bastard, are one of the lucky ones. You only owe him your life. Some of us owe him worse." "What do you mean, he's back?" Riker finally croaked. Grayson's smile thinned. "He never left. We just stopped looking in his direction, and that worked fine, until someone shot his daughter in broad daylight." Riker's jaw locked. "That girl was Ava. He saved her in—" "I know when and where," Grayson cut in. "Don't get sentimental on me. You want to do something useful? Start preparing statements, because when he finally speaks, we're all going to need a new language for sorry." Riker stood now. "We should come forward. Tell us what we know." Grayson laughed, sharp and joyless. "What do we know? Son, we don't know the half of what he is. You think this is about justice? This is about balance. And right now, the scales are breaking." Grayson left the room, the air behind him still stinking of truth wrapped in rot. Riker sat again, breathing through his teeth. He pulled the photo out one last time. The baby's face, the word on the back, Ava. He couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't hide behind decorum or protocol or plausible deniability. He owed the man who now threatened to unravel everything. But worse than that, he owed the girl. And debts like that don't expire. They collect interest in blood and silence. And the silence was finally speaking. The silence was still speaking. But now it spoke through distance, through presence held just outside glass doors and sterile lights, where the buzz of machines kept time and hope together. He stood exactly 48 inches from the threshold of the ICU, the soles of his boots aligned with the tile's break-in pattern, as if it marked a boundary he had no right, or no permission, to cross. For 6 hours, he did not move, not a step forward, not a word spoken. The hallway curved around him. Nurses passed, patients were rolled by on gurneys, visitors came and wept and left again, but he remained where he was, unmoving, unreadable, not watching, waiting. His arms were relaxed but not slack. His spine was straight but not strained. He wasn't guarding the room. He wasn't resisting it. He was denying it the power to make him smaller. The ICU was sealed tight with security glass, coded doors, and hushed voices. But it wasn't what kept him out. He was the one keeping the moment at bay. Inside that room, beyond tubes and monitors and flickering lines of green, lay his daughter, her leg wrapped, her pulse steady, her breath shallow, but present. That should have been enough, but his feet did not move. He had held her once as a child. After carrying her through a field strewn with landmines the world pretended didn't exist, he had watched her sleep with dust in her curls and his blood on her booties. But now, he couldn't step through the door. The staff began to notice. The younger nurses kept their eyes down, unsure whether to approach or call security. The older ones watched longer, saw the posture, the weight of it. They recognized control, not panic, focus, not detachment. One of them whispered something to the charge nurse, who then whispered to the doctor, and within an hour, 2 administrators were quietly reviewing hospital protocol to determine whether the man in gray was a threat or a protector. They couldn't decide. He hadn't asked for anything, hadn't even made a phone call. But then a trauma nurse, a man who had done 3 tours and recognized ghosts by shape, squinted from the far end of the corridor. He tilted his head, stepped closer, and narrowed his eyes. After a moment, he leaned in toward the attending physician and murmured, "He's not a threat. He's a reason threats don't make it to the building." The physician frowned. "You know him?" The nurse shook his head slowly. "No, but I remember the eyes. I saw them once before. In Ramadi, a man who held a bridge with a sniper and no food for 72 hours because civilians were trapped on the other side." The physician looked again, then nodded. "Let him be." The hallway stayed quiet. Inside the ICU, Ava stirred once. Her vitals didn't spike, but her lips moved. No one noticed it at first. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator support system, calibrated to ease her shallow breath. Then came a whisper, too soft for the machines to register but clear enough to cross the room. One word, "Dad." It came from the center of her sleep, a fragment of consciousness peeking through anesthesia and exhaustion. The nurse tending her leaned in, adjusted a dial, and turned to the doctor. "She's dreaming." But she said something. The doctor looked over. "What?" She said, "Dad." They both turned toward the glass, toward the man who hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched. But something shifted in the angle of his shoulders, barely a degree, just enough to suggest he had heard. He still didn't enter. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, not rushed, not hesitant, and removed a small, worn object wrapped in faded cloth. He unwrapped it with precision, revealing a silver insignia, a pin shaped like a falcon diving through fire, the wings etched with a call sign only 5 men alive had ever worn. He held it for a moment in his palm, then walked forward, not into the room but to the wall of glass that separated him from her. He bent, carefully, and placed the insignia on the floor just below the viewing window. No ceremony, no flourish, just placement, as if to say, "This belongs here now." Then he stepped back to his original position, hands at his sides. The nurses watched. No one interrupted. One of them reached for her phone to look up the insignia. When she did, the search came up blank. No branch, no designation, no matching images. But next to her, the trauma nurse simply said, "That pin doesn't exist anymore. It's not a symbol, it's a message." The security camera caught every second. The footage was stored automatically in the cloud, but flagged by the system as low priority. No alarms triggered, but in a separate building across the city, an analyst received a passive ping, not from the hospital system, but from a legacy code hidden inside a retired surveillance AI, one still active under a false identity. The image of the insignia on the floor was enough. The analyst didn't send an alert. He sent an acknowledgement, 4 characters, R3CD. Back in the hallway, the man resumed his position. His daughter breathed. The machines hummed. Time passed. He never entered the room, because to enter meant showing her something he had sworn never to let her see. The weight he carried, the anger he had mastered, the side of him the world had once used as a weapon and buried when it was no longer convenient. Inside that room she was safe, not just from violence, but from knowing, from remembering, from being afraid of who he had to be to keep her alive. She didn't need to see him now. She needed to wake and find peace. And peace was the one thing he could not bring with him. So he gave her something else, a symbol, a reminder, a promise without a word. He would wait for however long it took, but he would not cross that line, because that door did not separate him from her. It separated her from the storm. He would not bring the storm through the hospital doors. But that didn't mean the storm wouldn't move. The moment the hallway quieted and the nurse glanced away from the glass, he turned, stepped out of the ICU floor, past security without a sound, and walked into the night like a shadow never meant to stand still. 32 miles from the city, surrounded by a thicket of dying pine, a piece of land long abandoned sat beneath a half-coaxial shed. No lights. No signal, no memories left above ground. He arrived at dawn, parked the vehicle without headlights, stepped into the half-frozen soil, and knelt exactly where he had 3 times before, once in 1997, again in 2006, and now he didn't hesitate. The shovel was already buried under the warped boards, wrapped in plastic to prevent rust. The ground was packed hard, frostbitten at the top, soft beneath. 4 precise strikes. He rotated clockwise, counterclockwise, then lifted the first layer. Beneath it, a steel box the size of a small briefcase, scorched at the edges, embedded with a magnetic lock that required no key, only a pattern of touch. One he had not forgotten. He pressed once with his thumb, 3 short swipes across the side, and held. The latch opened. Inside, no weapons, no bullets, nothing crude, only paper, folded, hand-drawn, protected under triple-layered plastic, a map, not of terrain, but of systems, intersections between agencies, known collaborators, lines of communication that operated beneath official command. This wasn't a route, it was a record of infection, and on it, 2 names were written, in bold red ink, not their full names, only operational call signs. RV and N clerk, underlined once, circled twice. These were not unknown men. They were the two officers who had been present when his daughter was shot, not the shooter, the ones who watched. Folded into the map was a secondary insert, thicker, military-grade paper that hadn't yellowed despite the years. Across the top, stamped in a format that no longer existed, recognizing an engagement protocol. Beneath it, 6 checkboxes, all empty until today. He pulled a pen from his sleeve, uncapped it, and marked the first box. Then came the seal. From a hidden panel inside the case, he removed a metal stamp, flat, rectangular, with the Falcon Through Fire insignia at one end and the letters RP etched beneath. He reached down, moved a flat rock aside, to reveal a portable burner tucked in a vacuum wrap. He ignited it, waited until the stamp glowed dull red. Then he pressed it into the back of the action order, with the force of someone who had done this before. The paper burned slightly, edges darkening. The seal held. He let it cool. Next, he removed a plain black pouch and pulled out a single-use transmitter. Untraceable, pulse encrypted. He inserted the paper, sealed it inside, and attached the code strip. 72H//initiated. The countdown was now official. In 72 hours, the protocol would complete itself, with or without further instruction. He powered the transmitter and dropped it into a shallow pit beneath a dry stump. The transmission would ping the satellite relay in 8-minute intervals, then deactivate. One message. One trigger. Then he replaced the box, packed the dirt tight, reset the boards, burned the shovel handle and scattered the blade. There would be no record he'd been here. There never was. As he turned away, he didn't look back. 12 hours later, in a basement somewhere under Warsaw, a man with a ruined jaw and one eye scanned the signal, pulled the packet from the wall, and unfolded the map. His lips tightened when he saw the seal. He stood immediately. Didn't ask, didn't speak. He moved. 7 hours after that, in a fuel depot marked for decommission outside the Mojave, another man unpacked his kit, laid out 5 items. The last was a replica of the same map, drawn from memory. He ticked the second box. The protocol was live, and somewhere above them all, the system that had buried men like them beneath codes, covers, and denial shifted, not in panic, not in defense, but in recognition. Something was coming. Not war, not chaos, just a correction, drawn by hand, delivered by ghosts. Correction doesn't begin with bullets. It begins with memory. And in the quiet room deep beneath the decommissioned training facility outside Prague, 4 men stood in silence, surrounded by maps, field radios, and tools of a trade none of them had officially practiced in over a decade. But none of that mattered. They didn't exchange greetings. They didn't embrace. They placed their items on the table, one by one, like offerings in a cathedral of consequence. Not weapons, not gear, personal objects. Items that no unit ever issued, but that each man carried without fail. A lock of hair sealed in glass, a crayon drawing folded into the shape of a wallet, a pacifier threaded onto a dog tag chain, a plastic dinosaur, scuffed and missing one eye. They didn't speak of why they brought them. They didn't need to. The message was silent, unanimous, and weightless as it was crushing. They were fathers, too. And if the world dared to harm one child who bore the blood of their own, then it had struck at all of them. The equation was simple, brutal, and final. One of them, a tall man with scar tissue peeking beneath his collar, unwrapped a cloth bundle and rolled out a single, polished round of ammunition. He took a metal pick, twisted it slowly, and carved 5 letters into the side. A-V-A. The others didn't stop him. They didn't flinch. The act wasn't symbolic. It was documentation, a record of intent etched in copper. Another reached into his jacket and retrieved a photograph, black and white, weathered, corners curled. A girl stood holding a softball bat twice her size, missing her front teeth, but grinning like she could swing it through time itself. He didn't look at it long. He folded it once, kissed the crease, and placed it inside a tactical pouch. The air in the room felt heavier now, Not with sorrow, but with calibration. They weren't grieving. They were loading, readjusting, remembering the unspoken terms of a pact none of them ever wanted to reactivate, but always knew they might. The fourth man, a quiet one, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, removed a flash drive from his boot. He inserted it into a guarded terminal. Static filled the screen for 3 seconds. Then, without warning, an uncut video began to play. The shooting, not the one edited for public consumption, where the image was blurred, where the sound was muted, where the narrative was softened to serve agendas. This was the raw file, audio intact, multiple angles, the officer's shout, the way the girl had turned, the glint of the phone, not a weapon, just light on glass, the shot, the scream that never left her throat, and most of all, the father, the way he never broke posture, the cold precision of his restraint. The men watched without a word, no headshakes, no curses, just silent digestion. And then, after 26 seconds of silence, one of them said it. Quiet, flat, certain. They shot her, so they shot all of ours, too. The others nodded. One reached forward, paused the frame on the moment just after impact, when her body hit the pavement. When the blood began to spread through the pink, he didn't zoom in, didn't flinch, just stared. Then he typed 2 lines of code into the system. The drive encrypted itself and ejected. The evidence was ready. Elsewhere in the city, at precisely the same hour, an internal police account received an anonymous message. No greeting, no signature, no context. Just one attachment, the raw footage, the full truth. The recipient, a desk sergeant on rotation, clicked it, watched 15 seconds, then stood so fast his chair flipped. He didn't speak. He ran the footage up the chain. Within minutes, the precinct lit up with arguments, orders, and denials. But it was too late. The data had already replicated into a dozen dark corners of the internet. Wait. Back at the facility, one of the men unfolded a new piece of parchment. It wasn't printed, it was hand-drawn. A tactical web connecting city positions to public pressure points. Courtrooms, communication nodes, secure corridors. Each line had a purpose. Each node is a risk factor. The word response was written across the top, but only in pencil. One of the men underlined it once. Then he added a smaller word beside it, honor. These weren't men coming to dismantle the system. They were men reminding them of the cost of betrayal. No flags, no headlines, no signatures. They had buried their pasts long ago, not to forget, but to protect their families from the weight of who they once were. Now, that weight had returned. One of them checked his watch. 61 hours remaining. They didn't need more. They didn't speak of the girl anymore. Not because they forgot, but because forgetting was easier than remembering what it meant to see a child bleed and pretend it was protocol. So when the two of them leaned against the mahogany bar, half lit by a broken neon sign flickering somewhere near the ceiling, they laughed louder than usual, tapped their beer glasses together like nothing had ever gone wrong, and let the TV above them drone on about football scores and weather updates, because that's what the innocent do. The taller one, cheeks pink from alcohol and something more anxious beneath the surface, took another sip and said, "Told you, it's over. Gone. Hell, she didn't even die. That's how you know it's done. Nobody riots for a survivor." The other man, leaner and darker around the eyes, gave a short, hollow chuckle that didn't quite reach his chest and replied, "People forget faster than they pretend to care. Let the news cycle eat itself. By tomorrow, she's just another file on a desk that never gets opened again." The bartender set down 2 fresh pints, never meeting their eyes, never smiling, and neither man noticed the way his sleeves covered the exact tattoos that would have once branded him a ghost from somewhere far outside their jurisdiction. They also didn't notice how nobody else sat near them, how the waitress never returned after the first order, how the noise in the room had thinned like air at altitude, leaving them in a bubble of their own bad decision. The first man lifted his drink again, drained it to the bottom, then paused, tilting the glass toward the light, squinting at something just beneath the amber ring. At first, he thought it was a scratch. Then he turned it, blinked, and saw it etched into the glass. Small, deliberate, a mark he didn't recognize but that unsettled him instantly. A triangle split vertically by 2 clean lines. He said nothing for a second, then exhaled sharply through his nose and laughed too loudly too fast. "Okay," he muttered, nudging the glass across the table. "That's cute. Some kind of joke?" His partner reached for it, flipped the glass in his hand, saw the symbol, and frowned, not laughing now. Then he noticed the object sitting under his coaster, thin and metallic, dull as a coin but heavier. He lifted it slowly, turned it over, and read the stamped words out loud before realizing he was doing it. "For Ava." The taller man froze. Neither spoke for a long beat. Then he muttered, "You put that there?" The other shook his head. "No." "You?" Both stared. The taller one's fingers drifted toward his side, beneath his coat, toward the familiar weight of his holster, but when he gripped the weapon his hand tightened instinctively. Something was wrong. Too light. Wrong texture. The grain of the grip didn't match. He pulled it from the holster discreetly under the table, just enough to confirm the impossible. It wasn't his sidearm. It looked similar, but the barrel was sealed, the serial number scratched away, the weight all wrong. He set it down slowly and looked up, eyes wider now. His partner did the same check. Same result. Both of them stood without finishing their drinks. The bar around them remained still. Indifferent. No eyes turned their way. No music stopped. The bartender wiped down the same spot on the counter with the same rhythm, but the silence, pressing into the base of their necks, felt surgically placed, as if someone had stolen the air and replaced it with implication. They pushed out the front door with awkward haste, stepping into the empty night, where even the streetlights buzzed too quietly, and the wind no longer moved. The car waited in the parking lot where they left it, but now it felt too obvious, too exposed, as if getting into it was exactly what someone else wanted them to do. Still, they moved, eyes scanning alleyways, rooftops, the still-lit windows across the street. Inside the car, doors locked, engine humming. Neither said anything until the shorter man spoke with a voice strained too tightly for the words it held. "They were close enough to touch our weapons." The taller one didn't answer. He picked up the tag from the console again, read it once more, this time silently. "For Ava." He closed his fist around it and whispered, "They're not sending warnings, they're sending promises." The other man looked at him, then out the windshield, and the weight of what hadn't happened crushed them harder than what had. Whoever these people were, whoever he was, they didn't come to kill. Not yet. They came to show control, to rewrite fear from the inside out, to infect certainty with doubt, and let it rot. The taller man leaned his head back, heart pounding in the hollows of his ribs, and for the first time since the shooting, since the fake statements and the lawyer-checked reports and the sterilized media briefings, he understood something elemental and terrifying. They weren't out of danger. They were at the start. He closed his eyes, but all he could see was the look on the girl's face in that half-second before the shot, the way her hands were still open, the way the blood had bloomed across the sidewalk like something ancient and sacred being spilled for a reason no one wanted to name. And now, someone had named it for them. They knew it had gone too far when the screen went black. It didn't flicker, didn't glitch, didn't give them a warning. One moment, the terminal at the precinct's digital forensics center was compiling license plate data on the incident. The next, the interface collapsed into static. The cursor blinked red, and then all systems dropped into lockdown. No power surge, no outside interference, just a controlled kill sun that none of them had access to. Inside the surveillance room, a captain leaned forward and tapped the keyboard, then the mouse, then the side of the monitor, as if the machine could be intimidated back into function. It didn't respond. Behind him, an analyst muttered, "It's not a malfunction. Someone pulled the node clean." Another replied, "That's a federal-level bypass." The room fell into silence. No one said the name, but everyone thought it. SNID. Within 30 minutes, a call came down from the Office of Homeland Security, direct, terse, encrypted. The voice on the other end didn't give a name, only a title, and when the chief of the department answered, the directive came sharp and final. Do not engage, do not pursue, do not surveil. No one touches this subject until further notice. The chief, seasoned enough to know when not to argue, asked, "Is this a joint task force matter?" The voice paused. Then, slower, heavier, said, "This is no longer your jurisdiction. This is no one's jurisdiction." By noon, A private briefing was held at the regional command center, attended by top brass from multiple agencies. They sat around the polished table in a room engineered for strategic decisions, but today the air inside was thinner, sharper. A general from the Pentagon stood at the head, clean-shaven, silver-haired, eyes like a barrel waiting for recoil. He didn't smile. He didn't waste breath. I know what some of you are thinking. You want to fix this. Patch the hole. Make a move before it spreads. Let me be clear. Don't. He tapped a file onto the desk, a thin one with only 2 pages inside. No cover photo, no name on the tab. You don't move on this man. You don't tail him. You don't provoke him, because what you're looking at is not a suspect. He's not a variable. He's not even a man in the traditional sense anymore. He is the fail-safe protocol we hoped we'd never wake up. A younger officer, ambitious and not fully briefed, leaned forward and asked, "Sir, respectfully, are you saying one individual can compromise operational integrity at a national level?" The general's answer was quiet and immediate. "No, I'm saying we built him to." The room stilled. Someone cleared their throat. Paper shifted. Then the general went on. He was part of a parallel project buried so deep in the defense matrix it didn't even have a funding code. He wasn't a soldier. He was a contingency plan. A field algorithm in human form, designed to observe, calculate, and respond, not emotionally, not reactively, but with surgical intention. His last active deployment left an entire city sector uninhabitable for 3 years, and that was considered restraint. A murmur rippled through the room. The general shut it down with a look. "So if you think this is about some cop shooting a kid and a dad getting mad, stop thinking. This isn't retribution, this is calibration. And if you try to contain it, redirect it, or worse, manipulate it, what's coming won't be a scandal. It will be erasure." Back in the precinct, tension spread like mold. Every time a terminal rebooted, someone held their breath. Files on the shooting disappeared overnight. The officers involved, those who laughed, those who stood by, were removed from active rotation, not by HR, but by anonymous notices sent at 3:03 a.m., signed with symbols no one understood. Internal Affairs tried to run an audit. Their systems froze, and the entire department was told to stand down pending compliance protocol review. No further explanation. One detective finally spoke the words aloud. "We're not the law anymore," and nobody argued, because they could all feel it now. A shift in gravity, a tilting of balance. The man they'd filed under civilian father involved in traumatic incident was no longer an entry in their system. He was the system's answer to itself. At the Pentagon, the general took a final breath before leaving the room. "Let me spell it out, so there's no confusion. If anyone tries to neutralize this man, you won't just fail. You'll be teaching the world that silence has a limit, and he is the embodiment of what happens when you cross it." As the door closed behind him, no one moved, because deep down, they all understood. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a countdown. It wasn't the directive that broke him. It wasn't the sealed files or the blackout in precinct systems, or even the fact that his sidearm had been replaced with a dummy and returned like a child's toy laced in warning. It was the silence, the absolute deliberate silence from everyone else involved. No calls, no texts, no frantic group threads buzzing with damage control, nothing, just him, sitting in a motel outside state lines with a bag half-packed, a burner phone he kept checking for non-existent updates, and a growing sense that whatever game had been played, he was no longer even a piece on the board. The bartender hadn't looked him in the eye last night. The gas station clerk wouldn't take his ID without scanning it twice, and when he called the department to ask for clarity, the dispatch officer spoke like she didn't know his name, like she had never known it. By the time he wrote the email, his hands were already shaking. Not from fear, not yet. Fear requires hope, and he had burned through that a week ago. He was running on instinct now. He typed a subject line all in caps, "I'm being followed." The message was short, clipped, nothing like the bureaucratic cover-your-ass language he'd mastered over the years. "I'm leaving. I don't care what you say. He won't stop them. There's a camera mounted under my chassis wired in. I didn't put it there. He hit send, then stared at the screen, waiting for the bounce, the read receipt, anything. Nothing came. He closed the laptop, stood up and moved to the window. The parking lot looked empty, but nothing about it felt empty. The wind didn't move. The shadows didn't shift. And that silence was back again. Not absence of sound, but presence of judgment. He made it halfway to the car before he hesitated. Something about the air changed. Something about the weight in his chest felt more final than anxious. He crouched beside the driver's side door, reached under the chassis and felt the metal. Cold, smooth, wrong. The lens was there. Real, tiny, staring back. He didn't scream, he didn't swear. He stood, unlocked the door, and opened it. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It didn't throw him 50 feet into the air. It didn't turn the vehicle into a fireball of Hollywood choreography. It tore the cabin sideways and upward, shredding metal, glass, and synthetic trim in a single contained detonation designed not to kill, but to maim. He woke up 30 seconds later on the asphalt, skin torn, shirt soaked, ears ringing, his vision blurred at the edges, the smell of scorched rubber clawing into his lungs. Paramedics arrived, too fast, faster than normal. One of them looked at him and didn't ask questions, just applied pressure. The other whispered something he didn't hear, and the ambulance pulled away. In the ER, lights moved above him like judgmental eyes, and he tried to remember whether he had locked the motel door, whether he had deleted the email. Then he wondered if it mattered. When he finally stabilized, when the morphine dulled the truth enough to make it tolerable, a nurse entered with a clipboard, handed him a phone and said, "This came for you." He blinked. "Who sent it?" The nurse shrugged. "Didn't say. Just play me." He did. The screen lit up. Grainy video. Night vision. A parking lot, a group of teens. He recognized it instantly, a confrontation from a year ago. Off duty, no body cam, no paperwork, just a black boy in a hoodie reaching into his backpack too fast. He'd hit him, hard, slammed him to the ground, told him to shut up, told him to show his hands, told him he looked like trouble. And then he laughed, that laugh, cruel, clipped, mechanical. He had forgotten that laugh. The version released to the press had no audio, just context, just reasonable suspicion. But this was raw. It was him, unedited, undeniable. He watched himself lean down and say something no court could spin, something that sounded like a punchline to a joke the badge made acceptable. Then the screen went black. No message followed, no signature, just the weight of the moment collapsing into his lungs. He dropped the phone. The nurse didn't pick it up. He sat in that hospital bed, bandaged, bruised, and boiling, in a silence of his creation, and finally understood that this wasn't about justice. It wasn't about a protest. It wasn't even about the girl anymore. It was about consequences, about the long, slow echo of a choice you made when you thought no one would ever hold you accountable, and now someone was. No one came to arrest him, no one came to warn him, and that was the point. After the hospital lights dimmed and the screens stopped playing, the last of the two officers tried to rewrite the story in his favor, not by confession, but by construction. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was hunting for an exit. Guilt had never touched him. Not really, but fear had finally caught up, and fear made him clever. It made him sweat through the night and send encrypted messages to contacts who no longer replied. It made him delete everything that ever tied his name to a badge. It made him stage a fake mugging in a grocery store parking lot, shove a stranger under a CCTV blind spot, scream about retaliation, and then flee before anyone could call his bluff. He needed a narrative, a veil, a way to say, "I'm the one being hunted," even as every inch of him stank of cowardice dressed in procedural armor. The systems didn't bite. The press didn't notice. The footage stayed online for 17 minutes before being flagged and removed by no one he could trace. He turned to old favors, old power, men he once saluted, Men who once said things like, "We protect our own in rooms without windows." One in particular, his former commanding officer, had moved into private security. High profile, well-connected, built for damage control. The officer walked into the office without an appointment, eyes hollow, sweat already blooming down his spine. "I need coverage," he said before even sitting. "I need you to help me disappear." The older man leaned back in his chair, face unmoved. "You're not a ghost. You're not worth the ink to vanish." The officer leaned forward, desperate. "You know who I am. You know what this is. I didn't shoot her, But the other man held up one hand, not to silence him, but to end the noise before it stained the air. "You didn't shoot her, but you stood there. You didn't stop it. And now you want protection from the fallout? You don't need a fixer, son. You need a priest." When the younger man didn't move, he added one last line, cold enough to strip flesh. "You messed with the wrong bloodline. This isn't politics. This is blood law." He left without closing the door. His mouth was dry, and every hallway looked too long. His pulse throbbed behind his eyes like a metronome ticking down a final hour. By midnight, he'd made the decision. No more loose ends. No more risk. No more waiting. He drove across the city in a stolen vehicle, used a badge that no longer meant anything to walk past a night nurse too exhausted to care, and slipped through a hospital corridor that was quieter than any place he had ever known. The security was there, but it was quiet security. The kind that didn't announce itself. He didn't notice it. That was the point. The ICU floor was nearly dark. He reached the room without resistance. He knew the girl would be asleep. He told himself he would make it quick. No witnesses. No confrontation. Just silence. Just closure. Just erase the evidence and let everything rot behind him. He placed one hand on the door, took a breath, opened it, and stopped. There was someone already inside. Not a nurse, not a doctor, not a guard, and a man standing in the far corner, half in shadow, wearing a plain gray shirt and black boots that looked military but not recent issue. His posture wasn't tense, his hands weren't clenched, but every molecule of his body said one thing: this room is under control. The officer's breath caught. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The man didn't speak right away. He simply raised one hand, palm outward, a gesture not of peace, but of decision. Then he said it. Quiet, final, not angry, just true. Out, or lie beside her. The officer didn't move for a heartbeat. Then he turned, walked out, never spoke again. He didn't have to appear. His presence had already reshaped the air, redirected bullets, and collapsed hierarchy. But it was his voice, raw, low, recorded from a place that no longer existed on any map, that made the world pause. It began as an anonymous leak. A 12-second audio file was uploaded at 3:46 a.m. to a dormant military archive forum that hadn't seen traffic in over 6 years. No caption, no metadata, no source traceable even by deep forensic sniffers, just a simple waveform, dark red on black, titled in plain text, redacted_recovery. Alpha Mana. Then the voice spoke. If I die, don't forgive them. If I live, then the ones who hurt my daughter will pay. Not because I want revenge, because they woke something that should have stayed buried. No music, no breath, just that voice. So steady it cracked the bones of silence. It spread fast, not because of who said it, no one knew at first, but because of how it sounded. Controlled rage laced with mathematical calm. Not threatening, just certain. Within an hour, the file had been mirrored to 300 channels, translated into 7 languages, re-uploaded with waveform visualizers, reaction subtitles, and slow-motion emphasis markers. No one claimed it officially, everyone knew it mattered. By morning, the ripple had reached the forums, where men with scars for memories and tattoos they never showed in daylight recognized the cadence, the phrasing, the velocity of thought. One post read simply, "That's Ghost 3. That's him." Within minutes, old accounts went active. Call signs not used since the last troop withdrawal. Handles only visible inside war rooms. Some denied it. Most didn't. In a thread already archived, buried under 17 layers of shadow database, A new comment appeared from a user named BravoXIIII. I was there in A9. That voice coordinated 6 men through a black site clearance so brutal we stopped wearing watches because time didn't mean anything anymore. Another replied, I saw him order an evac on a village after command told us to leave them. They sent drones to wipe us out. He jammed them by using a frequency made out of panic pulse readings from his team. Another, that man once made 3 generals blink in the same room without speaking. He doesn't shout, he calibrates. The internet didn't explode. It pulsed. Every headline softened his name, blurred it behind euphemisms like unnamed operative, former defense asset, potential rogue agent. But in every comment thread, under every screenshot, the name started to surface in whispers. Not full, just fragments, enough to feel the weight, enough to fear it. And through it all, the phrase from the recording burned louder than the voice itself. If I die, don't forgive them. That wasn't a request, that was a doctrine. One civilian analyst, pulled from language risk mitigation, flagged the phrasing as non-ideological but radical in emotional truth. Her supervisor asked, what does that mean? And she replied, it doesn't incite, it invites. It doesn't want war, it promises consequences. And still, no confirmation came, not from the Department of Defense, not from Homeland Security, not even from the man himself, because he didn't need to say it again. The audio had done its work. It had crawled beneath the surface of the narrative, cracked the shell of plausible deniability, and exposed the real fracture, not in protocol, but in legacy. The girl wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was the match that lit an entire network of men trained to leave no trace, men who had given him their loyalty not out of debt or doctrine, but out of shared silence. Somewhere offline, in a small apartment in a city that hadn't mattered until that morning, a veteran watched the clip again. He hadn't served directly under Ghost 3, but he'd heard the voice once, through 3 degrees of separation, inside a bunker where transmission wasn't even supposed to reach. He closed the laptop, got up, locked the door. Outside the world kept moving, but now it was moving towards something it couldn't quite define. The world didn't pause when his voice leaked. It didn't collapse. It did something worse. It adjusted. Systems that once moved on command began second-guessing their orders. Eyes that always looked outward now flicked over shoulders. The silence that had followed him for years became magnetic, drawing suspicion, doubt, reverence, and panic into the same space. By the time his name reached boardrooms and cabinet meetings, no one said it without calculation. He was no longer the father of the girl. He had become a shift in pressure, a mathematical certainty that could not be spun or ignored. And in a downtown building layered in polished wood, artificial light, and false empathy, a community hearing convened to discuss next steps regarding officer conduct and urban security response times. The invitation list had been vetted. The press was told it would be procedural. The agenda, printed on cream paper, never mentioned his name. The room was full. Officials in suits, moderators with smiles too white, locals holding signs that wouldn't be shown on any official feed. The murmurs began like static when he walked in. No warning, no escort, no theatrics. Just a man in a gray coat, older than the rumors, quieter than the truth, walking down the center aisle like he had been summoned not by protocol, but by gravity. The moderator's voice caught mid-sentence. A few people turned their heads. Then, more. By the time he reached the microphone, no one was speaking. He didn't touch it, didn't need to. The room tuned itself to him. He stood there for one breath, then said 2 names. Just names, no titles, no rank, no accusation. They echoed through the room like gunshots in a cathedral. The officers who had been present when his daughter was shot. The men who had watched, who had failed to intervene, who had smirked in reports and leaned on ambiguity like it was armor. Their names landed with a weight the room wasn't built to carry. I'm giving you 48 hours, he said, voice low, calm, unmistakable, not to resign, not to apologize, to surrender. The silence afterward wasn't stunned, it was waiting. He didn't offer more, he didn't explain, he didn't posture. He simply turned, walked out, and as he did, the cameras scrambled to refocus. The press lunged for angles, officials shouted about procedures and interruptions, but no one followed him. Not one person moved to stop him. It wasn't fear in their legs, it was respect, carved out of something more ancient, something primal. Outside the building, the sky held the same dull gray it had the day his daughter bled on the sidewalk. Not a storm, not a clearing, just an echo of unresolved tension stretching over the city like a net. Reporters flooded the steps, hungry to turn words into clicks, to turn pain into narrative, but none of them reached him in time. Because a child got there first. A boy, maybe 9, black skin, cropped hair, eyes that had already seen too much. He stepped in front of the man, not out of fear, not out of awe, but out of instinct. He lifted one hand in a salute. Not military, not theatrical, but personal. The way a child salutes a hero is not because of what they've done, but because of what they refuse to become. The man looked at him, held his gaze for a single second, then nodded. Just one, and walked on. The cameras caught the moment. The networks scrambled to contextualize it. But the story didn't need captions. The world had just seen what it was always afraid to admit, that when institutions fail, when justice evaporates, people do not look to the system for answers. They look to the man who never needed the system to begin with. Inside the chamber, arguments fractured. One official whispered, "If he keeps pushing, this becomes a blueprint." Another fired back, "A blueprint for what? For one man to make the whole damn government sweat?" A third, younger, sharper, said what no one wanted to hear, "No. A blueprint for what happens when someone like him doesn't ask anymore. He commands." The mayor tried to issue a statement that night. It was vague. Pre-cleared, stripped of anything direct. He said the city acknowledges ongoing unrest and is committed to transparency and safety. But no one listened. Because the truth had spoken without ever raising its voice, and in homes across the city, in stations and halls and precinct kitchens, people watched the footage of the man saying those 2 names, giving that one sentence, and they all understood. This wasn't a threat. It was an appointment with inevitability. Somewhere in a bunker-shaped boardroom, a federal advisor whispered to a national security consultant, "We created him to fight wars, and now he's fighting memory." The consultant replied, "No, now he's fighting myth, and myths don't lose. They get repeated." And the sky, still gray, still unmoved, repeated itself too. Because once, not long ago, a girl bled under this very sky, and now her father had spoken beneath it, and everyone had heard. The questions didn't come from activists or pundits this time. They came from the ordinary, from those who didn't wear slogans or carry signs, but now stood shoulder to shoulder, staring through the cold marble steps of the precinct like they had finally recognized the shape of the rot behind the doors. The police chief had worn his uniform for the last 6 years like a symbol, starched into reverence, hiding behind crisp lines and press-ready statements. But now, the uniform was armor without purpose. The people weren't demanding answers, they were demanding evidence, and they wanted it not explained but revealed. By 9 a.m. his inbox was flooded with calls from civil boards, court liaisons, and state attorneys. Outside, camera crews didn't wait for press releases, they waited for fractures. And inside, for the first time in his career, the chief found himself standing on the wrong end of the power imbalance. What haunted him wasn't the father's warning, it was the silence that followed, the silence that made everyone wonder what hadn't yet been said. The real shift came from a courtroom, not a protest. A judge, not political, not theatrical, invoked an emergency provision that had long been dormant in policy, ordering a comprehensive review of every internal case, flagged but never escalated over the past 3 years. Not a summary, not a report, the raw files, full names, incident codes, internal memos, timestamped footage. The directive was clear. No redactions, no encryption, no shield clause. The department's digital archive groaned under the weight of what it had been told to forget. The IT team pretended the files were scattered, mislabeled, and archived incorrectly. But the judge didn't blink. "If your database is broken," she said, "then we'll replace your database." It was not an offer. It was a ruling. At 3:47 a.m. the next day, a man in a maintenance uniform entered the precinct through the delivery entrance. No one asked for ID. The camera blinked once and went black for 11 seconds, a loop so clean it could only have been deployed from inside the network itself. He walked with purpose, posture relaxed but bearing the weight of a task already rehearsed. He moved through corridors as if they belonged to him. The server room was his destination, but he didn't rush. He passed 2 officers. Neither remembered his face afterward. He paused at the access panel. The code he entered was obsolete, but the lock clicked open anyway. No alarm triggered, because some systems weren't hacked. They were written with a back door. Inside, the archive racks hummed. Heat bled from decades of compressed wrongdoing, thousands of terabytes wrapped in policy silence. He connected a small black device, no larger than a cigarette lighter, and keyed in a set of commands in a language that didn't exist on paper. The folders revealed themselves like bruises in X-ray contrast, sealed incidents, all marked reviewed, no action. He copied them, not one by one, not manually. The script was built to match hashes, reconstruct missing packets, and reassemble the full sequence. Text, video, audio, body cam streams, desk reports, email chains. In total, 12 cases, all with the same recurring tags. Excessive force, minor, racial identifier. All had been buried. None were ever supposed to return. He didn't review them. He didn't need to. His job wasn't to judge. It was to retrieve, to restore the record of what this system had done when it thought no one was watching. He exited the room, walked to the rear stairwell, and vanished into the delivery dock before the first shift change. When the next technician entered hours later, nothing looked touched, nothing beeped, nothing blinked. And yet, within the next hour, a file labeled mirror_integrity_test-ave was uploaded anonymously to 5 private inboxes, 2 civil rights watchdogs, 1 state prosecutor, 1 public defender's office, and a former internal affairs agent who had resigned in protest years earlier. Each file included a single note. These were never yours to bury. The contents spread like code beneath the radar. No headlines, no viral storm. Just truth whispered from inbox to inbox until it couldn't be ignored. Screens began to light up in courtrooms, in editorial meetings, in back channels that had long given up on transparency. Footage showed officers laughing as a suspect bled. Another showed a child being dragged by the collar after a mistaken ID. One showed a man kneeling with his hands up before being tackled, cuffed, and left with a concussion that would go unreported. In each, the same pattern: escalation, cover-up, silence. But now, the silence had a crack in it, and the crack was growing. The police chief was summoned to a closed session. They didn't let him speak first. The first thing he saw was a blown-up still from a body cam, one he had personally flagged as inconclusive the previous year. The timestamp was intact. So was the audio. The words spoken were not defensible. He tried to blame the chain of custody. He tried to say it wasn't part of official records. But then they showed the audit logs. He had accessed it. He had marked it handled. He had written the note himself. Now it was printed and projected, his language turning against him. Not actionable. Subject not seriously harmed. And next to it, a medical report. Skull fracture. 6 days in the ICU. The room fell into silence, not out of shock, but from something worse, confirmation. At the same moment, a second set of files appeared on a whistleblower site hosted overseas. Not just incidents, but internal chats, officer group texts, jokes, memes. Statements like, "should have kept his mouth shut," and "he fit the profile." These weren't just mistakes, they were patterns. They were attitudes. And they had been protected not by systems failing, but by systems working exactly as they were built to. The archive hadn't been broken. It had been precise. This was not about one officer. It was about the door that had always been held shut, night after night, by those who thought they were guarding the city, but had actually been guarding themselves. The man in gray never reappeared. He didn't need to. His message had never been about confrontation. It was about opening what others had welded shut, about forcing light into places that had grown comfortable in shadow. The 12 cases were just the beginning, because now every officer was being asked, "What did you see?" Every clerk, "What did you process?" Every commander, "What did you seal?" And no one had an answer that sounded like the truth anymore. By week's end, the precinct walls looked the same, but inside nothing held. Authority had become a question. Orders became suggestions. Every door had become glass. And behind every desk, a quiet dread lingered. Not that he would return, but that he didn't need to. Because now the people knew how to look. And the man who once walked through those same halls as a ghost had left behind something far more permanent than presence. He had left his memory. It wasn't on the schedule. No calendar pings, no government memos, no official channels logged it. And still, at 4:36 hours, deep beneath the federal complex in a chamber designed for containment, not conversation, they gathered. Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, Strategic Covert Oversight, 2 from the Legal Advisory Board, and 1 man who didn't wear a badge, carry a briefcase, or offer his name. The table was rectangular, too large for comfort, the lighting purposefully uneven to prevent recording reflections from polished surfaces. There were no files, no laptops. The only document present was a printed transcript from an intercepted email, 12 words long, unsigned. "I will not move if they surrender within 24 hours. You decide." It was centered on a single sheet of paper, with no punctuation, and it had no header, no agency watermark, no trace of origin. But everyone in the room knew exactly who sent it, and that was the problem. The first person to speak was a major general in charge of crisis containment analytics. His voice was practiced, clean of tremor. "If he makes good on that deadline, we are no longer dealing with a localized threat." A civilian advisor from Homeland interrupted. "We're already beyond localized." Another added, "We've got precincts 3 states out, preemptively reviewing force authorizations, internal unions threatening walkouts if asked to intervene. He hasn't even lifted a finger since the hospital. And we're bleeding compliance by the hour." The word. He didn't need clarification. No one used his name. Some because they feared it. Others because they respected what had made it untraceable. The general flipped the page over. "Blank. This isn't a declaration," he said. "This is a test. He's giving us a chance to decide if we're worth preserving." Silence followed. Not stunned silence. Strategic. Then came the voice that hadn't spoken yet. Gravel and calm. "No," said the older man in civilian dress. Hair clipped military short. Tone stripped of sentiment. "He's not testing anything. He already knows what you are. This is a courtesy." It was a murmur, not of disagreement, but recoil. "Who are you again?" someone at the end of the table asked, more annoyed than inquisitive. "Retired Colonel Abram Reese," came the reply. "Once commanded what used to be called G3 TAC. He was mine." The room changed temperature. Everyone straightened slightly. "You trained him?" someone asked. Reese didn't nod. "We trained the vessel. He built the intent. You think he's acting rogue? I think he's finally acting as designed." The Homeland official leaned forward. He was built for counterinsurgency. Reese's eyes narrowed. "And what do you think he sees now? Public betrayal? No. He sees a breach. He sees systemic weakness, leveraged against the innocent. That triggers a response." Another man across the table muttered, "Are you defending this?" Reese turned to him like someone inspecting a rusted weapon. "I'm describing it. If you want moral clarity, talk to your speechwriters. If you want survival, listen." By now, the people in the room had stopped pretending this was a round table. They understood it had become a tribunal, with no judge, no rules, and no safe verdict. "We have options," someone said. "Containment through controlled leak. Discredit the footage. Use chain of custody technicalities. We can seed doubt about his daughter's injury." A hand slammed the table. "You try that. You write your eulogy," Reese snapped. "You think people care about process right now? There's a child in the ICU with a bullet wound and a father who's kept more promises in a week than your whole agency has in a decade. The world's not watching you for clarity. It's watching to see if you lie again." No one responded. Someone scribbled a note they'd never read again. The general tapped the table twice. "We discussed termination options," he said. "Drone strike during transport, airborne toxin if proximity allows. But we pulled the directive." The others nodded. Slow, heavy. "Why?" the advisor asked. "Because if we kill him, we crown him," the general replied. "And right now, no one wants a martyr who never raised his voice." The conversation decayed into silence again, but it was Reese who dragged it back. "What's your real fear?" he asked, looking around. "That he'll retaliate, or that he won't need to?" No one answered. So he answered for them. "You're not afraid of his skill set. You're afraid of his restraint. He hasn't dismantled a single system. He's let the system implode trying to chase his shadow. And if he walks away tomorrow, everything he touched still burns. Because now people know what buried truth smells like." One man across the table muttered, "If we do nothing, we lose control." Reese leaned forward. "You never had control. You had an order, and he was part of it, until you shot his daughter and gave him moral clarity." A long pause. The general asked flatly, "What would you do?" Reese stared at the table. "I'd find the men responsible and offer them up, quietly. No cameras, just closure." "He wants them alive?" the general asked. Reese smirked. "He wants to see if we're capable of correcting our rot. That's the murder." The group moved toward operational mechanics. Someone raised concerns about the chain of custody if the suspect surrendered outside the official process. Others warned of vigilante backlash. Legal said there was no precedent for this type of conditional handover. The general waved a hand. "There's no precedent for any of this." One woman finally spoke. "What if they don't surrender?" No one had a good answer. "Then we hope he still believes in restraint," Reese said. "Because if he doesn't, this won't be an operation. It'll be a reckoning." He stood, clearly done. "You built him to solve impossible problems with impossible methods. Don't act shocked now that he's solving the one you refuse to see." Before he reached the door, he turned back once. "You've got 24 hours. You're not deciding who to protect. You're deciding what parts of yourselves are still worth defending." When the room cleared, nothing was recorded, nothing typed. But every attendee left with the same understanding. The world outside that bunker was no longer waiting for their decision. It was already adapting to his logic. By nightfall, secure lines buzzed with scenarios, risk assessments, and probable resignations. Someone suggested leaking the email to make him seem more threatening. "Make him look like a terrorist," one strategist said, and the proposal died on the table. "He hasn't issued a single demand," a Homeland advisor whispered. "Terrorists want something. He wants them." Another voice added, "He didn't threaten us. He offered us a choice." And no one wanted to admit how rare that was. The silence that followed the meeting was not a resolution. It was the weight of inertia cloaked in bureaucracy, the kind that doesn't end in signatures, but in surveillance. As dawn broke across the city, the feed from 17 municipal cameras shifted imperceptibly. No alarms triggered, no operators noticed, but the angles were different. A degree here, a pan delay there, minor changes that meant nothing to traffic analysts, but everything to someone watching from the outside. In one frame, a badge number, once obscured by shadow, now glinted clear. In another, a side alley previously cropped now revealed the flicker of an unmarked car tailing a civilian. Someone had rerouted vision itself and made it look like nothing had changed. And by the time the sun was fully up, the city was already being seen through different eyes. Officer G. Dallard didn't see the shift right away, but he felt it. The way you feel the air thicken before a storm. He followed his routine down to the second, left his third-floor apartment, crossed the cracked sidewalk, and nodded at the neighbor he never really liked. But the moment he approached his patrol car, he stopped cold. His side mirror was fogged, the surface wet from morning dew, and written there, not carved or painted, but traced by fingertip and condensation, were 6 words: "Today, you kneel or fall." No camera recorded the message being written. No witnesses came forward, but the implication was sharp as a blade tucked behind a whisper. He stared at it for a long time. then got into the car, slowly, deliberately. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't check dispatch. He just sat behind the wheel and listened to his breath. 10 minutes later, instead of turning toward Precinct Central, he took the ramp to the bypass, not speeding, not evasive, but undeniably fleeing. Something in the message had hollowed him. Not just its meaning, but the fact that whoever wrote it had been close enough to touch the mirror, close enough to breathe. He knew, as he gripped the wheel tighter, that this wasn't a prank. It was precision. He passed familiar exits, Elm, Griffin, Tate's Creek, and kept driving further, out of jurisdiction, past the digital fences. No one pursued, no one stopped him, because this wasn't about bringing him in. This was about letting him run, because whoever was behind the mirror didn't need a chase. They had already arrived. By the time Dallard crossed into the wooded stretch between county lines, his hands were trembling. He pulled over just past mile marker 117, on a shoulder worn by truckers and forgotten by planners. The woods yawned before him, dense, indifferent, quiet in a way that only places used for hiding can be. He turned off the engine, listened. Nothing. No birds, no wind, just a stillness that didn't feel natural. He stepped out, boots crunching dead leaves, and for a second he thought maybe, just maybe, it was all paranoia. Then he saw them. 4 men, or silhouettes of men, standing just at the edge of the tree line. No weapons drawn, no uniforms, no movements. They weren't blocking him, they weren't advancing, they were just there, as if they had been waiting, as if this moment had already happened before he ever arrived. Dallard froze. His mind ran audit trails of everything he had done in the last 3 years. Every unreported shove, every camera is unplugged. Every time he told himself the story wouldn't leak, his breath stuttered. One of the men stepped forward. "You're not being hunted," the man said. His voice was level, mid-range, unhurried. "You're being seen." Another man, younger, square-jawed, with the kind of presence that came from surviving more than leading, spoke next. "He's not here. He doesn't need to be. We are." Dallard didn't respond. The third man reached into a canvas folder and handed over a photo. Dallard took it without thinking. His face stared back, captured mid-motion, backlit by a street lamp. In the background, a black teen with his hands up, terror blooming across his mouth. A night Dallard thought erased. A file marked closed due to insufficient cause. But the angle, this photo wasn't from a body cam. This was the third angle, remote, calculated, framing that only someone watching from above could have taken. "You thought no one saw," said the fourth figure, voice darker than the rest. "But he did, long before we arrived, long before the first leak." Dallard looked down, then back at the woods, then at the road. There was nowhere to go. The older man stepped forward again. "He said you'd get a choice. He doesn't believe in executions. He believes in reflection. The mirror was your warning. This is the result." Dallard's knees buckled, not from threat, from truth. He knelt more from collapse than decision and let the photo fall. No one touched it. The 4 figures remained unmoving until he looked up. Then they turned, wordless, and walked back into the woods. No flourish, no ceremony, just disappearance, precise and final. It didn't happen like in the movies. There was no sudden gasp, no dramatic beeping, no chorus of nurses rushing in with tearful gasps. It happened in the soft space between seconds, where breath returned like a memory, and light filtered in not through windows, but through the delicate flicker of awareness. Her eyelashes fluttered once, then again. Muscles long dormant stretched beneath skin too pale. In the quiet room at the end of the ICU hall, where shadows had stood guard for days, Ava opened her eyes. There was no one beside her bed, only the soft beep of the monitor, the weightless hum of machines too used to waiting. She blinked again, slowly, as if returning her mind to a world that had gone on without her. And then she whispered, voice dry but unafraid, "Dad?" A nurse, just outside the door with a tray of water, froze. She had passed that room 100 times without pause. But now the voice shattered her rhythm. She pushed the door open, slowly and wide-eyed. Ava turned her head, lips parted. Her gaze was steady, groggy, but focused. "Dad?" she repeated, stronger now. The nurse stepped forward, heart thudding in her chest. "He's here," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He's always been here." Ava's brow furrowed, and for a moment the silence returned. Then her eyes drifted toward the window. There was nothing outside, just the sky, but something in her stillness suggested she could feel him, like a shadow folded into the walls, like gravity shaped in the outline of a man. The nurse reached for a glass of water, but didn't interrupt. Some moments don't need a witness, they just need room to breathe. Across the hallway, a janitor paused in mid-mop. He had been cleaning near that ICU door for days. Quiet, unnoticed, careful not to disturb the tension thick as fog. He stepped back now, lifting a trembling hand to his phone. Not to text, not to alert, just to record. A quiet image, unfiltered, without angle. Just a girl, eyes open, sunlight touching her skin, life returning to a place where death had lingered too long. He didn't speak, he didn't zoom in. He simply let the moment speak for itself. The video was 23 seconds long. By the end of the day, it had been viewed 10 million times. The caption wasn't official. It didn't come from media teams or verified accounts. It came from someone anonymous. Someone who uploaded the clip with 3 words and nothing more. She asked for him. Below that, the hashtag bloomed not as a trend, but as truth. He never left. It didn't matter where the footage originated. It didn't matter whether he had been there in that moment. What mattered was the weight of presence, the gravity of a man whose silence had bent the rules of consequence, whose absence had become proof of a different kind of justice. The hashtag spread like breath returning to lungs that had learned to live without it. Cities that had burned now stood still. Streets once lined with protests now held murals of pink dresses and father-shaped shadows, and in every image those words remained. He never left. By nightfall, reporters swarmed the hospital, but none were granted access. Doctors offered no comments. The hospital released no official statement, but the staff moved differently, gentler, more deliberate, like they were serving something sacred, not just clinical. One nurse placed a small stuffed animal on the table beside Ava's bed. Another paused to smooth the blanket without speaking. None of them had seen him enter. None of them had watched him leave. But every single one of them swore he had been there, not in body, but in impact. In this way, silence wrapped the room like armor. In that way, Ava didn't ask if she was safe, only where he was. And that, to them, said everything. The photo began circulating the next morning, not from security, not from the media, from a hospital volunteer who had been asked to deliver fresh linens and happened to glance toward the ICU as the sun broke over the building. Ava lay awake, propped against her pillow, the faintest smile curling her lips. She was looking toward the window again, and there, just barely visible in the morning haze, was the silhouette of a man in the courtyard below, back turned, head bowed, gone before the shutter clicked. Some said it was a coincidence. Others said it was a digital artifact. But for those who had followed the story since the shot fired, the blood spilled, the silence that followed, they didn't need confirmation. They already believed. The caption this time said only, "She wasn't alone, not once." In newsrooms across the country, the narrative cracked. Journalists who had tried to stay neutral now found themselves pulled into something deeper, not politics, not justice, but witness. They began running timelines, connecting the moments of disappearance and reappearance. They charted silence like it was a campaign. They mapped footprints that weren't left behind but felt beneath the skin. And every story, every headline, every whisper led back to the same point. The father, whose name no one printed, whose past no one confirmed, but whose impact rewrote the meaning of presence. At a school in Detroit, a teacher asked her students what the hashtag meant. One child raised her hand. "It means you don't have to say you're here, you just have to stay." Another replied, "It means even when no one sees you, you're still fighting." The teacher didn't respond. She just nodded and wrote the words on the board. He never left. Across the city, a mural began to take shape, not of Ava, not of the father, but of a shadow, holding back fire. Artists didn't sign their names. They just painted and left, each brushstroke a silent oath. By the end of the week, the world no longer asked who he was. They asked why it had taken so long for someone like him to exist. And Ava, sitting now in a chair beside her bed, a blanket over her legs, looked out the window as nurses checked her pulse, took notes, whispered updates. She didn't speak often, but when a volunteer asked if she wanted to send a message to the man who had waited without asking for anything, she simply said, "Tell him I saw him even when my eyes were closed." The volunteer didn't understand, but they wrote it down anyway. Some truths don't need explanation, they just need space to echo. He walked without a uniform, without a weapon, and without a reason that could be explained to anyone who hadn't lived in the skin of silence. The road to the old man's house wasn't long, but every step dragged weight behind it, like a ghost on a chain. The city behind him had gone quiet. The noise wasn't gone. It had simply turned inward. Screens no longer screamed his name. Headlines had grown quiet, but the guilt had never stopped talking. It spoke in the twitch of his fingers, in the stiffness of his spine, in the hollow just behind his ribs. Here, justification used to live. He didn't know what would happen when he arrived. He only knew he had to go. Some debts couldn't be paid, but they could be faced, even if it meant kneeling. The house was smaller than he remembered. He'd passed it once, back when he still believed he understood justice, back when he thought silence was safety and orders were shields. Now, it was just wood and shadow. He walked to the front step, shoes scuffing dirt he didn't dare shake off. He didn't knock. He just dropped to his knees. The weight of it was immediate, like gravity had been waiting for this moment to double. Wind passed over his back like a judgment. The door stayed closed. That felt right. Punishment should not come quickly. It should settle, slowly, quietly, finally. When the door opened, it didn't creak. It just shifted. The man who stood behind it didn't fill the frame with menace or anger. He wasn't larger than life. He wasn't a myth. He was tired, alive, entire. But in his eyes was something heavier than any prison conviction without ego, power, without need for performance. He looked at the man on his knees and said nothing. The silence didn't ask for an explanation. It waited for one to fall apart. The former officer looked up, lips parted. No words, just salt behind the eyes and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow. The man inside turned and left the door open. That was enough. He stepped inside without being told. The room was empty of decoration, but not of meaning. There were no flags, no certificates, no photos of the battle. Just one chair, one table, and two objects. The old man placed them there like offerings. First, a badge, burned at the corner, melted into ruin. Still recognizable, still damning. Second, a photo. His daughter, unbroken. The girl who should have lived her life without ever knowing her father's skill set was forged in blood. He was smiling in the picture. It hurt more than if she had been crying. He looked at the items and waited. "I kept it," the former officer whispered, afraid his voice might shatter the fragile moment. "I didn't know why. I thought maybe I was keeping it to remember. Maybe to forget." The old man said nothing. He just stared at the photo. The silence stretched until it filled the room like smoke. "What do I do now?" the man asked finally. The question wasn't desperate. It was broken. It was the sound of a man no longer looking for redemption, just instruction. The old man didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was with steel and fire braided into one sentence. "You tell it." "Tell what?" The old man lifted his eyes. "Everything. Every shift you looked away. Every paper you didn't file. Every time you stood behind the wrong wall and let someone else fall. No embellishments, no omissions, just the truth word for word, until your voice is raw and your soul has no breath left." The man swallowed hard. "That won't be enough." "It's not supposed to be," came the reply. "This isn't atonement. This is an assignment." The officer looked down. "I don't know how." The old man stared at him. "Then you start with that. Start with your ignorance. Let the world see it raw." He nodded, barely. The weight wasn't lifted. It wasn't supposed to. The old man picked up the badge and pressed it into his hand. "Carry this," he said. "Not to wear, to remind of what happens when authority is held without accountability. Then he took the photo, folded it once, and slid it into the pocket of the man's coat. "This is for her. You don't deserve it, that's the point." The former officer took both objects like they were burned, and maybe they did. He turned to leave, paused at the door. "Will I see you again?" he asked. The old man didn't answer, but he didn't close the door either. That, in itself, was all the answer he was allowed. Outside, the wind hadn't changed, but he had. Not lighter, not freer, but clearer. He walked with the steps of a man who would never sleep the same again. The badge in his pocket clicked against the edge of his phone. The photo weighed more than it should have, but he didn't drop them, didn't hide them. He kept walking, and when someone asked where he was going, he said only, to speak. And he would, not for forgiveness, but for reckoning. Because when you're given a second chance, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the truth you buried. He had not spoken in public since the tribunal, not after they stripped his name from the ledger, nor when the committee quietly redacted the commendation he had received 15 years prior for an act of valor none of them had the spine to reenact. It had begun with a headline that said little but implied everything. Former operatives' silence raises new questions. And from there, the court of public opinion turned the wheel of judgment faster than any government body ever could. The first protest didn't even mention Ava. It painted him as a symbol of unchecked force, of silent brutality dressed in civilian grief. His image, distorted, appeared on posters with the word executioner printed over his eyes. The irony, of course, was that he hadn't lifted a finger against anyone since the shooting, hadn't sought vengeance with fists or firearms, only with presence. But in a world addicted to spectacle, his restraint was mistaken for menace. The second time it happened, a former colleague went on a live stream, tearing into him with a smile that barely hid his fear. He wasn't a man, the colleague said. He was a protocol, something built to win wars, not raise daughters. The stream went viral, especially the part where he claimed the man had once chosen to complete an assignment over saving a child. It was a lie, but lies don't need roots to spread. They just need repetition. No one asked where the colleague had been the night of the shooting, nor why he'd scrubbed his name from the unit logs months earlier. The truth didn't matter anymore. The silence had begun to echo, and in the echo chamber of social wrath, the absence of self-defense became its admission of guilt. By the time the third wave came, a boycott of every hospital that didn't denounce him publicly, the narrative had fossilized. Doctors were accused of harboring a threat. Nurses were threatened for not leaking security footage. One hospital administrator received a dead crow in a shoebox with a note that read, "Silence is complicity." What none of them knew was that he had never once set foot inside under his name. He had been there only when no one watched, passing through the shadow like a whispered apology to every child he couldn't save in his lifetime of obedience. But outrage is a poor listener, and history is too often written by those who scream louder, not truer. The fourth cut came not from the public, but from within. A child, no older than Ava, stood outside her school holding a sign that read, "My dad says your dad is a killer." She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She folded the sign, handed it back to the boy, and walked past him without a word. But he saw it. Not from a distance. He had been across the street, unseen, beneath a rusted awning, hands in his coat, eyes on the child who carried his blood, but none of his silence. That night, he watched the clip make its rounds online, dissected in think pieces and comment threads. Most praised her composure. Others asked whether she was being trained to mimic him. No one asked how it felt to be 13 and made to answer for the shadows her father refused to cast. So he stopped walking during the day, stopped standing where even ghosts could be spotted. His revenge, if one could call it that, was never vengeance. It was the refusal to give them more ammunition. He became subtraction. He erased himself from city grids, walked the edge of curfews, passed through buildings as if time owed him a debt he refused to collect. And still, every year, on the day she woke, the town remembered in silence. They didn't name him. They didn't need to. Flags dipped at the same hour. Cafes played no music before noon. At the park, near the bench where someone had once carved a message that no rain could wash away, strangers left folded notes that said nothing but spoke everything. And now, after all that, he returned, not to be seen, but to witness. He walked without sound, as if the hospital walls themselves had decided not to report his presence. No security camera picked him up, and no staff greeted or stopped him. And yet not a single person doubted that he had entered. The door to her room didn't creak, didn't swing open in some cinematic arc. It was already ajar, as if the space had known he would come back one last time. Ava was awake now, propped up, pale but conscious, her eyes distant and wide like someone staring at something only she could see. When he stepped in, she turned, not sharply, not startled, just turned, as if a part of her body was always tracking him, even in sleep. She didn't speak, neither did he. He walked to her side, slow and deliberate, like every step carried the weight of a war that never needed declaration. And then he reached out, and she met him halfway. Their hands touched, fingers interlocked, no tears, no smiles, just stillness, as if time had agreed to stop and let them hold one another before it resumed the chaos of motion. He stepped past the security doors without hesitation, blending into the sterile fluorescence like a rumor moving through a crowd. Invisible, yet unmistakably present. No alert chimed, no badge scanned. The man at the front desk, young and barely aware of the weight carried in the air behind him, didn't look up. Somewhere, a printer stuttered out discharge forms. Somewhere else, a monitor flickered to black, then back again. The hospital had grown used to this ghost even if no one officially admitted he existed. Outside, the world spun its machinery of noise and spectacle, but inside this corridor, each footstep was absorbed into the hum of respirators and fluorescent lights. He kept his hands in his coat not from cold, but from discipline, as if the slightest misplacement of fingers might tip the scale of something too fragile to touch directly. He passed by a janitor with a mop, a nurse sipping her third coffee, and a vending machine blinking a red "out of order" sign. He knew this place. He had memorized its exits, its shadows, its blind corners where grief sometimes paused to breathe. But today, he was not here for maps or strategy. He was here to leave. Long before his daughter had awakened, long before the silence had calcified into myth, he had become a figure reshaped by the anger of the public eye. Not long after the tribunal was dismissed without charges, a mural of him had appeared overnight, his face reimagined as a mask, crimson lines slashed across it like war paint. The artist left a caption, "Some ghosts wear skin." Within hours it was shared 1,000,000 times, reshaped into GIFs. Slogans, parody. No one cared that he hadn't raised a hand since the day they shot Ava. No one asked what silence costs a man trained to make sound his profession. The symbol outweighed the man. His past, scrubbed of context, was easier to digest in hashtags and reaction clips. The second wound came through a clip from a city council meeting, where a local organizer stood holding a printout of his military file, leaked, redacted, weaponized for shame. "We built this man," she shouted, voice trembling but righteous, then watched him vanish into the fabric of society like a landmine waiting for pressure. Applause followed, not from knowledge but from hunger, for someone to blame. In the days that followed, people began protesting outside the hospital, not for the girl, but to demand cameras be installed in every wing, every hallway. "We won't let him disappear again," one man said to a reporter, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Silence is the new violence." The irony twisted in his throat, but he swallowed it down, said nothing, and stayed in the shadows. When a former teammate, long retired, disgraced, launched a podcast alleging he had been trained to walk through death like it was a hallway, the story caught fire. The podcast played a distorted recording of a mission debriefing, his voice clipped and flattened by edits, pulled out of the context of a war no one now remembered. The phrase that stuck, "If they touch my blood, I touch the root," was quoted as a threat, replayed over footage of the hospital, Ava's school, the burned badge someone had left at a protest, like an offering. The press asked no questions. They didn't need to. The internet had already decided he was a weapon, still primed. The fourth strike landed quietly, but hit deeper than the rest. A video surfaced, blurry and brief. Ava, before the shooting, playing hopscotch on a city sidewalk, laughing mid-jump. The video was traced back to a surveillance system meant for traffic control. It was posted under the caption, "She smiled before he stopped smiling forever." The comments that followed were venom, shaped like poetry. That smile died because her father taught the world not to flinch. What does it mean when the most dangerous man in the country is also the most patient? She's awake now. Will he train her next? No one asked how the footage had been obtained. No one asked who had the right to use a child's joy as a weapon. He saw it once, paused it on her face mid-laugh, then closed the browser and never returned to that corner of the internet again. And still, he returned to this hallway one final time, not for vengeance. Not for closure, but for ritual. His steps slowed as he approached the ICU. He could feel the space lean inward, waiting for him to cross. Every movement was deliberate, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to make sure she had seen him, not as the world had drawn him, not as the monster they fed to the masses, but as the man who stood without applause, without testimony, without need for anything but this one small presence. He didn't sit. He didn't stay long. The moment was brief, but not because it lacked meaning, because it was complete. She didn't ask where he'd been. She didn't ask what he'd done. She already knew. The world had filled her in with headlines, whispers, and shadows on sidewalks. But what mattered wasn't what he'd done. It was that he had never left, not really, not in the ways that matter. And now that she was awake, now that her voice could once again claim the space around her, he didn't need to linger. His silence had been his shield. Her breath was now her own. He left her room with the same quiet he'd entered. Nurses down the hallway glanced up but said nothing. Some had seen him before. Others only recognized the shape of him from stories passed among orderlies and late-night ER staff. The man who never slept, who stood outside the ICU without blinking. The man who didn't ask questions, didn't threaten, didn't cry, just waited. And now he walked out, down one hallway, through a side corridor, past a half-lit vending machine and a staircase no one used. By the time the first rays of morning touched the eastern wing, he was already gone. No camera captured his exit, no sign out, no final words. He vanished like steam off glass, there and then not. In the days that followed, no news agency ran his name. No police station reissued alerts. No department reopened his files. The silence remained. Not as fear, not as absence, but as agreement. Everyone, it seemed, had reached the same conclusion. Some figures belong not to justice or vengeance, but to the aftermath. You don't search for them, you remember them. The hospitals never confirmed his presence. The staff never denied it. But the room where his daughter had lain for weeks, room 209, was for some reason always left untouched for a few hours each morning, as if waiting for something unspoken to return. The first year after the incident, the town didn't speak of what happened. They simply acted. On that date, every flag was flown at half-mast. No one announced it. No one enforced it. It just happened. Schools didn't hold assemblies. Churches didn't preach forgiveness. People just stood a little longer before doors, looked a little deeper at their neighbors. For a moment, silence was respected, not mourned, honored. A kind of national pause in miniature. The kind that doesn't require legislation, just memory. By the second year, a small plaque appeared on a bench in the town's central park. The bench itself had no previous significance. It wasn't near the hospital. It didn't sit near a statue. It was just a bench under a tree, by a walking path. But someone had carved into it with clean precision. He didn't want justice, he wanted silence, to be heard. No one claimed the carving. No one removed it. City maintenance simply applied sealant over it, quietly preserving the words like scripture on public wood. Over time, it became a place of quiet visits. No flowers, just presence, as if people came not to say something, but to remember how not to speak. Kids began asking questions. Not many, and never with urgency, just small ones. Was he real? Did he stop everything? Why didn't he talk? Teachers, parents, and elders gave different answers. Some called him a soldier. Others called him a ghost. Some said he was just a man who broke when the world broke his daughter. But the most repeated answer, the one kids learned to respect, was he didn't want to be known. He wanted to be understood. And somehow that was enough. In corners of the internet, stories still circulated. A blurry photo, a streetlight flickers. A silent alert was sent to a server that didn't exist anymore, but no one chased the mystery. They let it hover. They let it mean what it meant. He wasn't a myth. He wasn't a warning. He was proof. That one man's silence, when held with unwavering clarity, could shake the very foundations of noise, not by shouting, but by waiting for the world to shut up long enough to feel shame. Ava grew older. Her limp healed slowly. Some scars remained, but her voice grew sharper, and when she spoke, rarely, powerfully, she made sure not to speak about him, only from what he left. "I'm not here to carry his name," she said once, in front of a quiet gathering. "I'm here to prove that you can be heard without ever asking to be loud." The room didn't applaud. They just stood. Thank you for listening to the story to the very last moment. Every part written is a piece of heartfelt effort sent out not only to recount a journey, but also to ignite questions within each of us. About justice, about silence, and the power of unspoken love. What are you thinking? Please share your thoughts, your perspective, or even your own story in the comment section below. Whether you've walked through darkness or are still searching for a small light to keep going, your voice matters to me and to others who are quietly reading every word. Don't forget to hit like, so I know you're walking this path with me. Tap share so the story can reach further, touch more people, because there are days when just one story at the right moment is enough to revive a long-forgotten sense of belief. And please, subscribe to the channel to give me the motivation to keep writing, keep telling, keep living alongside the characters, so that every week another piece of raw, honest emotion can be sent your way. Thank you for staying, for listening with your whole heart.